With me now is the author of a brand new book, this book right here. It's called What Do White Americans Owe Black People? Dr. Jason Hill. Dr. Hill, good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we are sitting here in Orlando, Florida at NatCon. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, if you want exclusive access to these videos, before we release them publicly, you can join us at the Liz Wheeler Show community on Locals at lizwheelershow.com/locals. Like I said, exclusive first peek access to all of these interviews. But talk to me about your book, because I find this concept very interesting. You are a Democrat, but the positions you take in this book are counter to what the Democrat Party preaches and purports with their policy.
Actually, I'm no longer a Democrat.
You aren't. Now, this is what we're going to talk about.
I'm an independent conservative.
Okay.
Who's typically voted Democrat. But I've been, as Glenn Loury said today in his speech, I've been mugged by reality. So I've had sort of a conversion experience, and I simply could not see myself voting Democrat in the future. I'm an independent conservative who's very worried about the idea of pathogens that are infecting this country. And so I decided to write this book because I think, among others, one of the idea of pathogens infecting this country is the idea of reparations, that white people owe Black people something, in which is reparations. And I love this country. I'm a great patriot of this country, of this republic. I came here from Jamaica when I was 20 years old because I fell in love with America from I was about the age of 10. I wanted to be an American above everything else. And increasingly, I have seen where the divisiveness in this country has grown worse by a rhetoric and a narrative spawned. You can't even call them the far left anymore. Let's just call them the Democratic Party, the left. And the idea that white people, because their ancestors might have owned slaves, which is also a fallacy because the majority of white people living today, their ancestors came after the Civil War. Or the idea that every single affliction or every single asymmetry or disparity between the races is causally linked to slavery, which is fallacious, and that whites have responsibility to Blacks. I think from an ethical standpoint, as a trained ethicist, I thought this was wrong, that it was dividing the country further. And so I wanted to write a book to show that the freedom of Black people, the emancipation of Blacks, the reparations of Blacks were forged in the crucibles of 1776. And we've had three great foundings in this country. 1776, the Civil War, and the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and the subsequent 1972 Employment Act and the Affirmative Action Programs. So I think that reparations have been made to Blacks. And what I wanted to provide to readers, both Blacks and whites, was to provide a sense of inoculation against the fallacious claims that whites owe Blacks something other than respect for the inalienability of their rights as individuals, not as groups, and to destroy the identity politics that I think is superseding our notion of individual rights in this country.
Right. And I think you are absolutely correct. I love to hear this. I'm looking forward to reading this book in its entirety. But talk to me a little bit about where you think this false narrative is coming from, because it is being pushed and peddled and published by everyone from, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to the New York Times's 1619 Project. It's being taught in public schools and universities. This is really the primary narrative that we're hearing about race when it comes to police-involved shootings, when it comes to anything that could possibly be associated with the color of somebody's skin. Who seeded this in the modern era? Where is this coming from? Because it's so widespread, it's not isolated to one or two or three race baiters.
Well, I think history buffs are going to really love this book because I think, an exemplary job, if I may say so, in the fourth chapter of showing the antecedent roots of this narrative, which I think was forged in the crucibles of the latter part of the Civil Rights Act in what I call the revolutionary or victim studies. That is Black studies, Chicana studies, queer studies, women's studies. These were studies that were activist studies. They were advocacy studies that were meant to assault the Enlightenment project. They were meant to assault American civilization. If you look at these studies very, very carefully, they criminalize reason, they criminalize logic, they waged a war against all the values that we take to be foundational of the American Republic: individualism, the free market enterprise, the family. And these victim or revolutionary studies were forged by the left as a means of atoning for past grievances, which were understandable. So when we look at something like Black Studies, it brought Blacks within the domain of the ethical or the pantheon of the human community. And it was, among other things, made to make Blacks be part of the sovereign mass. Unfortunately, what happened was, instead of taking advantage of what was heretofore denied Blacks, which was they were left outside of the educational domains, they ran roughshod over the educational system and declared a war against Western civilization. And you see this in women's studies, you see this in queer studies, you see this in post-colonial studies, Chicana studies, all of what I call these activist or revolutionary or victim studies. And so the chickens have come home to roost now. In the 1990s, when I was a young undergraduate, I remember Jesse Jackson marching with students saying, ho, ho, Western civilization has got to go. And I remember saying, God, I want to be a professor so bad. Please give me at least 25 years of university before I'm canceled. I actually used that word before it was fashionable. And so the chickens have come home to roost. These seeds were planted in the latter part of the 1960s civil rights movement.
So here's my question to you. I think you hit on something really important here, and that is this is not something that happened overnight. It's not something that's just manifested in the last 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years. This ideology, or this poisonous ideology that centers on race, has been something that the groundwork has been laid for decades, decades, if not a century. And so fixing this or eradicating this ideology, especially from our university system, is not something that can likewise be done overnight. How do we begin to eradicate this so that at least future generations of students who are now in this education system, or even children that are in elementary school and high school that are yet to, get entrance and be indoctrinated by these schools, aren't brainwashed with this nonsense? How do we stop this?
Well, I have been on record for years as saying that we need to realize that our universities have become national security threats. They're producing enemies of the state. They're producing extremists who despise the Great Republic or unprecedented Republic, United States of America. And once we recognize that these national security threats, which have become indoctrination centers and not bastions of learning, but indoctrination centers for far-left Marxist ideologues who want to change the political DNA of this country and turn the Great Republic of America into a charnel house, a communist charnel house, we need to defund universities. We need to defund especially the social sciences and the humanities, which are the purveyors of this nefarious ideology. We need to get more parents involved in the educational system. We need to encourage alumni donors to withdraw their support, or if they're going to support the universities, to affix conditionals to their support. That is to say, we will not support our destroyers. Businessmen and businesswomen who are the primary donors of these to the universities have got to say, look, if you are going to teach left-wing Marxist ideologies, then you've got to also teach conservative viewpoints. And when rejoinders are issued in the classroom, you cannot punish conservative students and fail them, as I have seen as a professor of 25 years in the classroom now. When conservative voices speak up, these students are failed by their Marxist professors. So we've got to I don't think it's going to happen with this administration, but hopefully with another administration, we will have something like massive defunding by the federal government. We will convince alumni donors and corporate entities to affix conditionals to the allocation of their fundings, that we won't tolerate a one-sided ideology that is devoted to destroying our republic.
Yeah, and it's shocking the level that it's gotten to, that conservative students can't even speak on campuses. I mean, I talk about this pretty frequently, but it's not that I have a problem actually with Marxist ideology being discussed and being learned. It actually should, I think, be discussed and learned, because that's part of the history of the world. It's part of what we need to protect against in this country. My problem with it, of course, is that when it's taught as if it's correct,
that's right,
and the opposite, which is liberty and freedom and everything that we stand for in our country, is taught to be wrong. That's what makes it an indoctrination center versus a university where you learn both good things and bad things. You learn right and wrong. You study ideologies that are both virtuous and poisonous. And I don't know. I think that this is an incredible exercise in a conversation that we need to have, and we need to be louder about things like this, because conservatives especially are stigmatized if they talk about race. They're accused of being white supremacists. They're accused of discriminating against Black people. When the truth of the matter is, if you look at the practicalities of so many of these racial issues, the facts fall on the side of conservative principles and conservative policy. So your conversion story and the fact that you're writing this book, I commend you for doing so. I'm going to show this to our viewers one more time. It's called "What Do White Americans Owe Black People?" It's written by Dr. Jason Hill. Dr. Hill, will you tell our viewers where that they can purchase this book?
Well, if you have a Barnes & Noble store close to you, you probably can get it. But the best place to purchase the book would be Amazon.
Of course, Amazon. Look it up. Look the title up. It's anywhere that you can buy books, you will find this book. And let us know on Locals what you think of this. I will, of course, pass on all of your comments to Dr. Hill. Dr. Hill, thanks for joining me today. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you haven't already, give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button below, and ring the bell to make sure you never miss a video.